the results of the U.S. drone strike in Kabul, and I think you're learning some more information about that, Will. So what's happening?
Yeah, that's correct. I believe I believe we mentioned this strike in Kabul last week that did end up killing civilians. I believe the last tally I'd seen was 10 people, all members of the same family, the Ahmadi family. And I'd seen some conflicting stuff. I think it was six or seven of them were children. I believe seven, including a 3-year-old little girl. So, a pretty grisly, horrible death toll, and a lot of kids to be killed in this strike. This was the second U.S. strike on alleged ISIS targets in Afghanistan over the last few weeks. The first one was in Jalalabad, and as far as we know so far, did not kill any civilians. Though we may learn otherwise at some point once there's some more reporting on that.
Or we may
However,
not ever learn, Will, as often happens in countries like Somalia, which, I think one thing to know is they're reporting out of Afghanistan, especially places like the Nangarhar province where, there's an ISIS-K element. Maybe the reporting out of there doesn't get so good, and we're going to, start to have a lot of people being killed by the U.S. if Biden continues these overrides and capabilities. And just something I want to point out is I think the reporting then, what we get about these stories is going to decrease, especially when they're not happening in Kabul.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, in these remote areas, like, the CENTCOM, they'll say, 0 civilian casualties, but we really have no way of confirming or knowing that. And if there aren't many journalists on the ground there, especially ones that can speak and write in English, then yeah, we may just never learn that information. But this second strike, though, in Kabul, the Pentagon claims that they struck a car carrying Islamic State fighters and explosives. And they claim they actually saw people loading bombs into this vehicle, I guess presumably through like drone footage or something. And while the government has at least acknowledged reports of civilian casualties, I don't think that they've actually acknowledged any themselves yet. But even then, they have tried to suggest that it was not their drone strike that may have killed these civilians that, they haven't even confirmed, if were killed or not. But if there were civilians killed, they say it was secondary explosions from a bomb inside the car that may have done it. And so that is their story. That's the official sort of Pentagon account right now. However, relatives of these victims are now disputing that version of events. I think it was two brothers of the Ahmadi family, Ramal and Amal. They spoke to the Associated Press, and they say they do not believe there were explosives inside this car. And they say the U.S. has offered no evidence to suggest that there were. And one of the brothers was quoted as saying, quote, they have to give us answers. Is our blood so worthless that we don't even get an explanation? Basically just saying no one's telling them anything. They've been kept in the dark about this. This brother also says there were children inside the car that was hit, not only just in the vicinity of the area nearby. And he's disputing that there was a bomb in this vehicle. In this vehicle. He's saying that if there were one, that there should have been much more damage to the surrounding area in this courtyard where it was hit. Apparently, there were a couple gas cylinders in the location of the strike that were totally undamaged. And so he's saying that if there really were a bomb in this car, those should have been totally destroyed, as well as much of the area. And I did see some photos of the area, and there are some vehicles that look like they were pretty destroyed. But it's not really clear to me which one was supposed to be the car bomb, and you'd think it would be a little more obvious if it supposedly had been carrying this huge amount of explosives inside. The photos I saw, though, maybe didn't give the best look of the area. Reuters had a series of them on their gallery. However, the other brother, Amal, is also insisting that none of the people of none of his family members, none of the people who were killed in this strike had any ties to the Islamic State or terrorist groups. He even said that two of the relatives who were killed in the strike, they actually had worked with U.S. forces in some capacity during the occupation, I think as contractors of some sort or interpreters. And they were even applying...
And just to clarify on that, because the U.S., as you said, is still claiming that they were Islamic State, and they just haven't responded to the specific claim from the alleged relatives of the victims that the people killed work for the United States. They're kind of ignoring that and just sticking with this was a terrorist.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, but these relatives claim that they had... Oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you?
No. Go ahead, Will.
Okay. But yeah. So yeah, anyway, these relatives are saying that they'd even applied, these two guys who had worked for U.S. forces, they'd even applied for special immigration visas, and they even had commendation letters saying that vouching for them and saying they had been good allies or whatever. And so that would definitely cut against the idea that they were Islamic State fighters. And this brother Amal, he also says there weren't only kids in the car that was hit, but that there were clearly kids out in the open where the strike took place. And so one of his quotes was, quote, "They have such high technology that they can see an ant on the ground, but they couldn't see a yard full of children." And I thought that was a pretty good point, because the Pentagon is claiming that they had such good granular intelligence that they saw guys loading a bomb into this car in real time. They claim to have that good intelligence, but yet they couldn't tell that they were about to bomb like a courtyard full of kids. So, I think that was a good point to raise as well. Now, one argument that I've been hearing from hawks about this strike and about these civilian casualties is that it just goes to show about why we shouldn't have pulled our troops out. That had we had a more of an on the ground presence, that maybe we would have had better intelligence, and maybe we would have avoided killing these innocent people. But that is just absolute nonsense. Like, we've been killing civilians with drone strikes all along in Afghanistan, including when Obama had 100,000 troops in the country. A real on the ground presence. That the hawks seem to want right now. And it actually, thanks to the heroic leaks of Daniel Hale, we know that at one point between 2012 and 2013, 90% of the people killed in U.S. drone strikes were civilians. And so this idea that we can blame these civilian deaths in this Kabul strike on the withdrawal and the lack of an on-the-ground presence, that is just complete BS. That argument does not hold water at all.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say here is even though the Pentagon hasn't come out and officially confirmed that it killed civilians in this strike, they have tried to roll out this sort of argument that these civilian casualties may have been killed by so-called secondary explosions, from the bombs inside the car. However, that is not the first time that they've tried to use this excuse. And in fact, our more loyal and diehard listeners may remember the very first time I was ever interviewed by you back in 2017 on your old show, Foreign Policy Focus. We discussed a story about a U.S. airstrike in Mosul, Iraq, on a house that killed more than 100 people. And, it was a massive bloodbath. Some reports put it over 200 dead. But after that strike, the Pentagon tried to argue that it was secondary explosions that killed all these people, not the, 500-pound bomb they dropped on the house that completely reduced it to rubble. And so, they're trotting out this sort of same excuse again for the Kabul strike. Our bombs are good bombs. When we drop bombs and they explode, they do good things. But, these were bad bombs that killed these people, So that's sort of, the Pentagon's sort of up to its same old dirty tricks here and using the same kind of excuse to justify or explain away these civilians killed in Kabul.
Yeah. Well, that fantastic, and thank you so much for all that great reporting on what's happening here. Now, I guess, do you have it? I guess it was the Pentagon that carried out this strike, but we don't really have clarity on how Biden has revised the guidelines for these drone strikes, where at one point during the Obama administration, if there were a possibility of civilians getting killed, it was more strict and they couldn't do this. And then with the Islamic State, and then especially I think during the Trump administration, they really loosened up the rules even more. And so is there any indication of who approved this strike, how high up the chain of command it went?
I'm not sure. I'm as far as I know, the Pentagon has been very scant about the details they've been willing to put out about this. I know that the Pentagon spokesman, John Kirby, was repeatedly asked details just about, because, they've been calling it an over-the-horizon strike. And I don't believe they've even given any details about that, about where this may have been launched from, or the, sort of the approval process or anything. And it's unfortunate because I've been checking the Pentagon press briefings, and it seems reporters are less and less interested about this strike. More and more, you're just hearing questions about the evacuation process, which sure is important and interesting. But it's unfortunate that it seems interest is being lost in this drone strike.
Right. Well.